So let's talk a little bit about actually managing the data. It really becomes a system that is a continuous system. The data is collected according to the protocol. Hopefully there's some internal quality audit checkpoints at the site. The data is submitted according to the protocol. It's reviewed at the data center where queries are often generated, can be generated. We'll talk about that. And then data is corrected and resubmitted. And this is kind of just this ongoing cycle of data submission. And I think the picture says a lot, but I'm just going to give an example for our phase 3 trial. There are probably close to 7,500 to 9,000 pieces of data that might be collected for a single patient. And so if you take that times a study that may have a sample size of 500 patients, that's going to be over 4 million pieces of data. So it kind of gives you a perspective of the amount of work and the importance of collecting accurate data when it comes to that level of effort. So again, I want to talk a little bit about the investigator responsibilities as far as relating to completion of the CRF. The good clinical practice, or GCP guidelines, really specifically state that the investigator should ensure the accuracy, completeness, legibility, and timeliness of the data. And that would include that all sections are completed, any alterations have been properly made, and all adverse events are fully recorded and they are reported accordingly to regulatory bodies. So timeliness is very important. Ideal, I feel, and I try to really encourage my staff to complete the data forms as closely after the visit as possible. This is where you pick up on maybe something was missed. Maybe it took place and information was stated, but it wasn't documented completely. You're going to remember, they're going to remember to complete that and know the information and record it closer to the visit than if a staff person is waiting to go back in 3 months later and fill out that data form. It's a little too late to capture the information that might have been missed. It also ensures that the information can be retrieved or followed up on while that visit's still fresh in their mind. There are problems that are encountered when CRFs are completed, and this is very common. Sometimes there might be a lack of source documentation. I think one thing that we continually found in our site were physicians failing to report in the source document what the patient's actual performance status was. Simple, but often our auditors will require that number instead of just a description of the activity of the patient. It was a frustrating event. So we developed actually a source document that captured that so we could have the information. There can be errors in the protocol adhering to the protocol. There can be missing data, transcription errors, lag in data entry, poor patient recall after adverse events, and also just patient poor compliance. Queries are day-to-day activity if you've been involved in clinical research much at all, particularly as a research associate or a CRA, a research nurse. They basically review they're reviewing the activity within the data that's collected. It helps to clean the data, and it helps to assess and resolve some inconsistent data missing or range discrepancies, deviations from a protocol. And very commonly, sponsors will generate what we call data clarification forms, or DCFs, and they're sent to the investigator for resolution. Again, this is more probably common with the paper forms than the electronic, because as I said, electronic forms, the opportunity to collect or to clarify and correct issues is usually provided at the time of data entry, but not all the time. I really hope that any research sites do have some sort of an internal process to review their research before they have an external auditor come in. To wait until that external auditor comes in to find your problems is not a good idea. To be proactive, self-identify your errors, develop corrective action plans, correct your SOPs or update your SOPs, and then this is just really key to preventing non-compliance, and it helps to then train your staff more appropriately as well. So hopefully those issues are resolved at the time and aren't ongoing. Just a little bit on data safety monitoring boards, because I see in your all your topics for discussion that there is a discussion on data safety monitoring boards, but I think it does play an important role when you're talking about data management. The data safety monitoring boards are basically boards that are made up of experts that, for specific, usually disease categories, that review trial data and look at accrual rates. They look at adverse events that have been occurring, and they also look at the data reports as far as what is the interim analysis showing. They also then, by doing that, might capture issues for trials. If the accrual rate is really slow, they're really going to encourage that investigator to figure out why, develop methods or look at what the problems might be, and perhaps an amendment needs to be made to the study to change something in eligibility that's prohibiting accrual. They look at adverse events. If one arm is a two-arm study and one arm is more toxic than the other, the data monitoring board might suggest, depending on how severe those differences might be, of shutting down one of the arms or even shutting down the study. And doing the interim analysis also helps to assess, is one arm possibly giving better results? Are patients, and they usually write this out in their data analysis plan of what they will accept as a level of change between arms. If one arm has reached that threshold, they may actually shut a study arm down and continue maybe the other arm, or shut the study down itself. So the data safety monitoring boards really do play a key role in assessing trials.